have to ask this question. I can't imagine that anyone tuning in isn't thinking this. Your pastor supports you. You're pointing out, this is the nonsense that happens. Here's what I don't agree with that's going on in the church, and yet you still have that day job. Why do you think that is? Welcome to The Rich Dawn, where eternal beatitude begins in this life. I'm Kyle Dean, and today I have with me Jonathan Molik, the founder of the We Are the Easter People podcast. You can find it on Spotify and other podcasting platforms. Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming.
Yes. Yeah, I know. The last time that we were formally in the public sphere together, well, I guess you could say it was World Youth Day, like a month ago. But before that, on your podcast, you had me on. I have to say, man, I rechecked it recently and checked out your latest episode. And I like how it says, like, uniquely, Kyle Gorlick, part 1.
I know, and part 2 got lost out in the interwebs. My technical difficulties got the best of me.
That's okay. But in some ways, I guess you could say this is part 2. But obviously, we'll also be back on your podcast
Part
soon.
2 is coming soon, absolutely.
Yep, no doubt. And for this show, we say where eternal beatitude begins in this life because, we don't need to wait until we die to be in heaven. Like interiorly, we can attain that 9th level of prayer. And in fact, we ought to. That's a huge PSA that I love to promote when providing value with this kind of a platform. The name of the game is just to build our community and to, just to learn about from, where we're at. But like with Jesus and the Samaritan woman, not to leave us where we're at. So with that, we brought some bourbon.
Absolutely.
To go on the journey together. Cheers, man. So with that, I pass the mic off to you, man. Like, what is new? What's going on in your life? Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, I reached a point, I think, where I realized I finally found like what avenue of like the Catholic world I want to spend my time in. So my full-time job is being a pastoral associate for a parish in Buffalo. So I do a lot of like outreach, inreach, like generic pastoral care in a parish. And I love parish life. Like that's definitely like where my heart is.
Awesome.
But I wanted to find the balance between, I didn't want to be an insanely, I'm going to use political terms, but right-wing Catholic person, because I think there are some newer Vatican II things that have benefited the church. But I'm also just not going to piggyback on whatever the church says is gold, and we need to just accept it for what it is. And I think I'm working on finding that
human component.
That human component, that healthy median range. I've started on my next book, and I'm titling it Reclaiming the Basics.
Nice.
Because I think there's things that we can incorporate from the modern church, but just taking back very simple old school practices and putting it into the philosophical, cultural, economical lenses of society, and how like you can implement your faith and basics of the faith to increase the economic situation in the West, to fix the social political aspect of the West. And
beautiful.
That's kind of where I'm going. I want to be that medium between, we can marry the two together.
Right. Yeah. Tradition isn't some like amberized, fossilized thing in the past that doesn't continue to develop, but at the same time, it's not something to reject.
Correct. Yeah, and I think tradition's good. All tradition's good, but I think you can look at it through like some of the newer discoveries, right? Benedict XVI wrote a motu proprio, always and everywhere, and he talked about like this concept of the new evangelization and how it changed from time to time. And you look at things like, well, look at the world, the blending of cultures and genders and religions because of global scale migration. Look at how the economic spheres change across the landscape of the 20th century, and how the church, the mission doesn't change, but we've inherited such great values. Like science has taught us so much in the church. And you look at when you blend in philosophy, psychiatry, psychology, and you can take those sciences and kind of work it into the faith, I think you can reclaim some basics of the faith truths that'll help bring things into a modern light.
Beautiful. Now, one more time, what is the name of the book?
Always and Everywhere was a motu proprio.
Well, no, your book.
Oh, my book is going to be called Reclaiming the Basics.
Reclaiming the Basics. And any trajectory on when it'll be out?
Easter time next year.
Okay. And you said that you're working on your next book, so you already have a book out there? Or?
Yeah, so I used to work in sports journalism in high school and college. That was like my original thing. So like I wrote some stuff in like the soccer world, and then I was able to contribute to other Catholic books, like multi-author kind of books.
Nice.
I think one's out now, and then I've published in different journals and articles and stuff like that. So I've definitely publish different things. This would be like my first, like, this is my thoughts.
Yeah.
Not more of I've always done like journalism. Here's the truth. This is like telling a story, where this is like, no, this is my philosophy. This is what I think. And if you don't like it, that's okay. But here's what I think could help the church
You know what I love
going
about
forward.
That? What I love about that is, and I actually just brought this up in a recent episode with Brady Webb, who we've had on, and we referenced, your podcast where the two of you had discussed. And so feel free to, reference anything that got brought up there if you'd like. But it's this idea that, journalism used to be a blue collar profession, right? Like, strap up your bootstraps and go to town, figure out what's really going on, be with the people and let the people know what's going on. And it's been taken over by liberal elites.
There's no objective truth in modern day journalism. And that's why I dropped out of journalism school.
Which it's not journalism.
No, it's not. It's you're going to be paid to write this story because this is the story we need to run based off whatever influence, whether financial or not, is coming in, advertisements, kickback, just how we've developed our newspaper, our radio station, our channel. When I was in high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I always enjoyed writing, and I was doing little writing on the side. So I was like, okay, I can go to school for journalism. That'd be cool. And I pictured I'd have the fedora with the journalist hat on the side, right? I'd be in some small town, penny saver, just work my way through the ranks. Like, the dream you read in the movies. I'm like, I could do this. Then I was like, you know what? I love politics. I want to be the guy in the helicopter above, like, Iraq covering the wars.
Okay, all right, listen, I've said in previous episodes, and maybe you've picked up on this because you're like, I'm going to use political terms. I've said, like, I don't personally like to get into it. It's not that interesting to me. Yeah. Let's get into it. You want to get into it? Let's get into it.
I just think being able to be, like, I think that'd be so cool. Like, I would love to cover, like, I thought I'd cover the elections or I'd cover, like, world wars. And, like, I thought those two things always fascinated me. And I'm like, that'd be cool. Like, I figured I'd move to D.C. I looked at, like, Georgetown, George Mason, like schools like that. I was like, I can get into Capitol Hill, send me on a helicopter to Syria, I'll cover the war, right? Yeah. And then when I realized, like, those things don't happen. Like, you're going to sit in an office and someone's going to tell you what's happening, and you're just going to have to objectively believe them and write the story. And I'm like, well, that's not journalism. So is that really true? Like, why won't you let me go see it with my own eyes what's happening? Because I think every country naturally has a sense of, nationalism where they want to portray it in their medias. I mean, look at North Korea and China. You look at the media that comes out of North Korea. I don't know if you've seen the famous Vice documentary where you walk down the streets and all the storefronts have this, looks like fresh food and stuff. The guy goes in and it's plastic.
No, but I did see the movie that got hacked by Sony.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Portrayed that in a very comical light, but it's not funny.
Yeah, it's based off of, and Vice, like, politically I don't agree with them, but they do journalism. They're going to tell a story. They put their philosophy into it, but yeah. So, like, then I'm like, are we doing that as a country? And if so, that goes against all my Christian morals, if that's what we're doing. For a country founded on Christian morals, we fell off the ladder somewhere in the 19th, 20th century. So I was like, I can't get paid no matter how much you pay me. I'm not going to sit here and compromise my morals.
Good for you, man.
So then I was like, okay, I got to find something else. And, I did a bunch of other things and found my way working in the church. And then I realized I'm at a place where I'm like, okay, I can do journalism. I don't need a company to be a journalist, right? I can do it myself. Look at Twitter. Everyone's a journalist nowadays, right?
Well, all joking aside, first of all, I just want to say your fire is palpable and thank you for it. We need more people like you in the community. Because essentially what you're saying is I've got values, I'm going to stick to them, and I'm not going to compromise on them. And unfortunately, I guess that makes you dangerous in the eyes of some people, right? Like, I didn't even realize that this was going to be what we would talk about on this episode. I just figured we talk about your podcast and faith and whatever. But, like, they might try to bill you some, like, political revolutionary like they did our Lord.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So there's a prudence that's necessary with what you're describing, but I certainly kindred spirits, man. I mean, obviously it's not lost on people. I point out how I helped earn Western New York the Pulitzer Prize of Journalism, and I take that very seriously. Like I've essentially had the journalistic bone since I was 12 and got access to the internet for the first time. And I've always been diving into, like a quest for the truth. And so I guess it just depends on how you coin your terms, right? Like, there's one movement that's quite popular nowadays is this idea of citizen journalism. Yeah. I feel like that's like the new colloquialism for old school blue collar journalism.
That's almost like the soapbox preacher. I'm going to stand in the town square on a carton, and I'm going to just talk about what I saw, and they're going to lynch me, they're going to love me, whatever happens, but it's going to happen.
But this is the news.
And that's why
information's being conveyed.
My podcast was built on coming out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy, coming out of the sexual scandal in diocese, and be like, you know what? I need to show people in Buffalo that there are still Catholics in Buffalo. That's the tagline of the podcast, telling the stories of Catholics in Buffalo. Right. That is the whole concept of it, because we still exist. And it's, you know, you brought up the term of like discovering the truth. I don't personally believe the truth needs to be discovered. The truth just needs to be rediscovered, which is, again, the premise for the book. It's like the truth of the faith is there.
It's self-evident.
Yeah, we're just reclaiming it. We need to just dust it off again. You know, there's the old joke about like, oh, how much dust is on your Bible on your nightstand, right? I talked a lot with parents when I had like confirmation kids, and like, yeah, I bet you own a Bible in your house. I bet you there's this much dust on it. You're not doing anything new. I'm not asking you to rewrite.
Listening in, it was more than a millimeter.
Yes. I don't think I'm not asking you to like discover this new truth. I'm not asking you to stop your life and go on this new journey. I'm just saying dust the dust off of your truth in front of you, which was given to us in the Bible, and read it. It's right in front of you. I'm not asking you to reinvent the wheel. I'm just asking you to just take 5 seconds and blow the dust off the top of it.
And maybe if they take some time to get through the wisdom literature, they'll recognize Ecclesiastes 1, 9, and 10 that says there is nothing new under the sun. Yeah. Right? Like, we're not, like you said, reinventing the wheel here, but we do need to knock so that the door will be open. We need another band like the Byrds that takes Ecclesiastes and writes hit songs. Yes. Turn. Yes, we do. Well, we do. And, you know, it's funny because I don't tend to get into politics because it's not my space. And I personally believe that as a person of faith that we're kind of like the spiritual referees over either side, right? Like I've always been independent, so to speak. But if someone really pressed me for my political affiliation, I would say I'm a divine monarchist, which is, you know, it's almost like, you know, St. Thomas Aquinas talks about how monarchy is the superior form of government when done well. Yes. As long as someone is virtuous. And that's why I throw the divine qualifier in there, because, you know, when God's at the helm, you know, it's going to be all right. So, of course, in some sense, we have to wait for the eschaton for that. But in the here and now, I mean, there have historically been many profoundly virtuous kings and queens, and countries have gone quite well and whatever. But all that to say, I think that it's so important not to fall into tribalism, because that's what bothers me. And that's in politics, that's in the church, right? Like, you know, this idea that, listen, we've defined liberals and conservatives and traditionalists and charismatics and this and that and whatever, and you know, you have to hit these data points or else you're not on the team, and that's profoundly wrong. I have a love-hate relationship with Rockefeller. I love showing you work as hard as you want, make as much money as you want. Capitalism, man. Do as you please. I got nothing wrong. If you're going to work harder than the next guy, you deserve the riches of that, right? Do it morally, do it ethically, take care of the neighbor who maybe doesn't know how to work hard enough. Yeah. It's in the Bible. But I despise the educational system that he laid down, right? The United States educational system was built to produce robots to fulfill the needs of the culture. You need to train people to mine the iron, to build the clothes, all the different jobs that existed during Rockefeller's era. And comes with that is this annotation of like, in school you need to belong, because you're gonna have to fall into one of these camps. And when you are told from such a young age you need to belong, you're naturally going to get tribalistic. You're naturally going to do what you have to do to fit in because you're told you have to fit in. I think it's dangerous to be too much independent, right? You get some weird people out there who are like, I'm doing my completely own thing. And I think that's led to a lot of like the gender dysphoria in the country right now, and the sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s, because people are like, I'm not falling into that camp. I'm going to dye my hair green and call myself this because I'm not going to. And well, the word gender was invented by a monster. Yeah. I mean, it's a 1970s construct. Writings on the wall. We act like it's been around forever. Yeah. Which is weird. I don't, because people, again, history scares people.
They don't want to talk about the bad times, right? Everything needs to be this concept of light and love and beauty and stuff. Don't find it in the faith. God forbid you open up a Catholic Bible and you find love, faith, and beauty and all the other things. But
Sure.
people find it themselves. So when you get into these camps and try and belong to people, you do ridiculous things. And I think you can trace that all back to how the educational system was built. You're going to fall in the line because you're going to follow these rules. You're going to adhere to these set of grades, these set of basic standards that we think you need to be a productive member of our society. And you don't have a choice. And then the people who have somewhat of an intelligence to break off and do their own thing.
Too unlike a caste system.
No, not at all. It doesn't. History repeats itself. History is a giant circle, and it's going to continue to be a giant circle.
So is politics, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you go too far to the left or too far to the right, the ends touch. It's a circle. I've seen this. I mean, I've seen people that self-identify as, whatever it might be, far left, far right, and of course they have their own more polite terms for it. And they behave, in effect, the exact same as the people they despise on the other side. It's a sick irony.
I've been getting more into psychiatry lately. Big plug for Dr. Jordan Peterson. If he's listening, I love you and all of your work.
I've heard you do this on your podcast.
Yeah, I love Dr. Jordan Peterson.
We can go there.
And he was talking about this concept of like agreeable people avoid the more agreeable you are in your nature, you're going to avoid conflict,
yeah,
right?
You're not going to get as far in life.
That's just natural. And you're not going to get as far. But I think not only do I think what the church has come to in modern catechetics makes people more agreeable, but I think we can go back to the educational system, right? You're taught in school that you need to be this agreeable person. Like you need to share your toys with the other kindergartners. You need to be agreeable and work in team projects, and you need to be agreeable and accept that what you're being taught is true. And then when you get to that level of agreeableness, you don't get confrontational to confront the issues that maybe there are issues. And how long are we going to let this go in our society or in the West? I'm just going to speak generally in the West. I think all of the West is just falling off the wagon. And how far are we going to let it go? And then you see the opposite side, the people who don't allow that to go in the East. You look at China, you look at Russia, you look at countries out there, right? They've gone too far to like disagreeableness where people are taking too much of confrontation, right? So where's this blend? Like how do we blend the East and the West again, right?
Maybe it's a healthy between collaboration and competition.
Yeah,
right. When
absolutely.
everything is so competition focused, that's where you get, and I've touched on this with a licensed counselor in a recent episode, Dan Lawson. He really made the plug that we're bred to become consumers, and we ought to be much more than that, right? We need a relational component, and we also need that faith component, spirituality. And so it's not all about being competitive, right? Because if you're only doing the education system in a way that breeds, people that are vying for the spot, in their workforce, that's too much on one swing of the pendulum, right? So on one side, you've got all of this competition, this focus on, getting the next job, vying against everybody else that's in your space. And then you swing the pendulum into the other side, right, with the agreeableness, to your point, where, it's like collaboration and get along and this and that. And we're talking about where do you find the balance, right? Like, you do need both. Mm-hmm. You can't just have... Jordan Peterson talks about how when you raise young children, you do tend to find that by default, they are vicious. They don't, like to play nice. They don't like to share. And you have to develop them out of that. You have to teach collaboration or else you're going to get psychopaths. But you also don't, you don't disavow competition. Right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned you're all about capitalism. You're not really going to have that if you don't have people that are competing for making sure that they actually provide the best product or service or whatever it is that they have to add value. So, yeah, to your point, there does need to be that balance, right?
To that Jordan Peterson point, you mentioned be a monster, just learn how to control it. So you can be that extreme when it's called upon to be that extreme, but you need to know when to put yourself in the cage, metaphorically speaking.
Flipping some tables.
Where have we seen that before?
Okay. All right.
I had an experience. I went to Buff State for 2 semesters. It was the worst 2 semesters of my life in education. And it's because I encountered this professor. I was taking I don't know if it was mythology or a mystagogy class at a liberal public school. And I'm like, you know what?
So in other words, mythology.
Yeah. I was like, okay. My professor was a bishop in the Church of Fairies based out of Ireland.
Okay.
Off the boat from Ireland, was a nice guy, right? But he was the bishop, and the universe and everything was controlled by fairies. And he was the link, the door to teach you how to interact with, we all have our own fairies that control all of our emotions, our thoughts, everything we do is controlled. I picked up this glass because a fairy is somehow controlling the situation. I didn't really listen to all of it, but it was the concept that fairies run the universe, right? And he...
Wait. Because that sounds so bananas. I need more context. You're saying that in the context of this class, he posited that as a possible legitimate worldview? Is that the idea?
He didn't know how to turn off his personal life from just being a professor. And I think you see that a lot in United States, higher education systems is,
But, sure. The professors become activists and they use their platform to push whatever.
I don't know if you've seen the movie God's Not Dead, but how's that whole journey start? It's because the professor's like, okay, we're all going to agree. You write God's not dead in this piece. God is dead. You're all going to get 100. We're on the same level, and we're going to be able to get to what he calls real philosophy, right? Same guy with this guy was basically like berating the concept of like anything I brought up that was Catholic was like, nope, this is the objective truth, and we all need to just agree on this. And most people are at college, they're just there, whatever you say, professor, right? Because they just want to get the grade, they want to get out, they're not going to fight it. And I'm like, that's not true. Like, I can't sit here and again compromise my morals.
Not to mention, it's not critical thinking.
It's not critical thinking. It's not natural to suppress your moral views. Like, that's not how you're wired to think. So again, I ended up dropping out of this class. I actually ended up dropping out of school that day altogether. I left this class and I just said, this is complete garbage. This is ridiculous. I mean, you're not going to sit here and tell me that my views on like natural law and like gravity are wrong. And you're going to tell me that like fairies are picking up my textbooks for me. Like, I'm not going to stand for this.
You brought me back to contemporary moral problems. When I was in college, I went through a bout of this where the professor was trying to push, the latest and greatest, morally relativistic viewpoints on how to solve issues. And they always put you in these like impossible, strange scenarios where it's like you got to pull the lever to save this many people, or the boulder's gonna crush this many people. Either way, you're responsible because someone's gonna die. And it's like, and you get put in these impossible situations that are hypothetical. And cue Harvard Law 101, right? Like, never answer a hypothetical question, for one. And for two, it's like, where is divine providence in all of that? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, what happens when I pray to my guardian angel and something supernatural happens?
My math, I was in a theoretical math class. My professor's the final question on the final exam was 2 + 2 = 5. Because theoretically, all numbers are 2.99999. We choose to
bow
round.
To the altar of wokeology and you pass.
Yep. We choose in modern math to round to the whole number that's in front, instead of how decimals work. So in this theory class, you would go by the theory of decimals. 2.99 is actually 3. So somehow it worked out that 2 + 2 was 5 because you'd meet in the middle or some ridiculousness. And I wrote 4. I flunked math because I didn't put the answer she wanted, because she had this new theory. Of course, she wrote the textbook. She was the brain behind the school of new theoretical math, and she wanted to impose. She's like, I'm large and in charge. This is how the educational system works. You give me money, I'll tell you what I think is true, and you tell me back to my face what I think is true, and I'll pass you. You'll get a piece of paper with your name on it, and now you can go raise a family and have a job.
So in some sense, this must be personal for you.
I have a beef with the educational system, yeah. Not only because what I've seen it do to just humanity, but my own experience in just the educational system. I'm not saying education's bad, but I think we've fallen off the cliff locally, like in the United States. Like,
so then from what I've gathered, you may say the same about the institutional church.
I'd say the same about the institutional church too. I think there's been certain people that are in hierarchical positions who have, this is how we see things now. And they cover it by, well, this is how the church has always worked. I'm a part of the magisterium. I'm a successor to Peter and the apostles. Therefore, that's how it's always worked. Peter said something, it became practice. Paul said something, it became practice. So what's the difference if I say it, right? They cover it with real canonical thoughts because they're not wrong. Magisterium is the teaching, governing, authoritative body of the church. They're not wrong by what they're saying, but that's a terrible use of canon law in order to get their point across. And I think you see this
that's why you hear warnings against clericalism, coming from the top.
I think there's healthy clericalism. I think we've gotten too far away from clericalism.
Well, I think I might agree with you, but I wouldn't define it in the same terms, right?
We
Like
need to
there
rebrand
there needs to be hierarchy. There needs to be a strong leadership. It's of course got to be grounded in virtue. So if that's what you mean by clericalism, like if you mean like the cleric is in charge, I would agree with you. Like I think that it's the princes of the church that need to get together if people want to, say that there's some sort of a major issue that's happening towards the top of the hierarchy here on earth in the church militant. That being said, there's also, it's going to be the Blessed Mother that's going to save us from the issues that we're dealing with right now. Of course, and for any Protestants that are tuning in, everything the Blessed Mother does is only by virtue of, Jesus Christ. So
by the office of the Queen Mother.
Right. So it's ultimately God that's going to, divine intervention is what we need for a lot of the issues that are happening in this day and age. But anyways, what...
I see clericalism as like, people are so... They're trained, right? We just got off the whole educational system. They're trained to just perceive things a different way and then act on it. You always saw a priest and his clerics, right? Like you knew a priest was a priest. So if he entered the room, you would naturally make it a point to like, I'm probably not going to swear, or I'm going to make it a point to go say hi to Father, right? Because he was just this much higher above you on the like humans are equal, but priests were just enough higher where you looked up to them, you respected them. They were the bigger presence Christi. In the room, correct? Because it's common to see priests who, they were taught through seminary, like, oh, you need to fit in, you need to get away from all this stuff. And I'm not saying they can't wear shorts and t-shirts on their days off and go golfing, right? I'm not saying priests are fully entitled to do that. But when they act the same, like they're on the same level as human interactions, then when you go to Sunday Mass, these younger kids or these younger people, they don't see them as like that authoritative figure that I need to respect and listen to attentively, because they see as like, oh, that's Father Bill. He comes over on Sundays when my family comes around for like our spaghetti dinners. And that's great. I love priests that visit homes and stuff like that. But
and by the way, Father Bill loves talking about the Bills in his homily.
Absolutely he does. He always gives a score prediction at the end of Mass. I think that's where healthy clericalism is like, yeah, invite Father around. He can wear dressed as you and I are to Sunday for spaghetti dinner, but make sure he's the one who says grace. Make sure there's a common understanding with your kids of like, that's still the priest. When they go to Mass on Sunday mornings, oh, he's up, that's Father. I was taught to always listen to him. Like, he's important, like the guy up there. Then you actually have a different, and that's why I love the Latin Mass. You clearly know as a lady, you're the lady. You're not participating. This guy's offering sacrifice for you. This guy's leading you in prayer, and I'm just fortunate enough to be allowed to watch. Sure. Right?
Well,
they have the opportunity to be there in my own participation, my mental prayer, and
there's a huge
reception of communion
component on the part of the laity as well there.
But there's that differentiating, right? Even when the physical things like the altar rails, I can't go into that space, but he can, so he must be more important than I am in just a very basic, simple way where I need to listen to him, respect him, and do what he tells me to do. Nowadays, there is no, you walk into modern design churches and the altar's on the same level as the floor that you and I are sitting on in the pews. Like there isn't even like a step up to like a sanctuary now. And it's like, there's no divide. They want you to just all be one big communal, like the Last Supper theme, right? We're all around the table sitting together, and like, that's beautiful and wholesome and stuff, but why can't we put him up 5 feet higher than everyone else?
So you've brought up a few different things here. So just to be clear about where I am with all of these things, of course I agree with the vast majority of what you're saying right now. You're not going to hear an argument from me. I'm a avid Latin Mass goer. And, I know very well, a lot of the distinctions between what the church has historically done versus a lot of the innovations and things that are happening today. And if you want, we can get into that. But, I wouldn't call, Father actually maintaining the dignity of his office clericalism in a healthy sense per se. That's just me. But, to me, that's just part of being Catholic.
I think that's
in his station in life.
But I think that's even more important to why we have to reclaim the basics. I think we've gotten so far behind. It's not understood that Father needs to just protect his office. And we should help him protect his office, and we should teach our kids to protect that office too.
Oh,
even
of
if my
course.
son doesn't become a priest or a deacon, he's going to sure well know that that office is more important than. I'm not saying, my son, you want to be a carpenter, a lawyer, you're doing great things. You're a garbage man. You're providing this society. You're raising a family. You are a great human being full of morals and virtues, and I pray that's what my future children are going to be. But in the end of the day, his office is more important than yours, and I want you to remember that.
Sure.
Your salvation is dependent on his office existing and him doing his office right. And there's a lot of pressure on priests. And I think we've taken the gap. No, what's that?
I hope I'm getting the movie title right. The movie that I'm thinking of is focused on, I think it was the Jesuits. I don't know. I don't recall the exact era that it was portraying, but Robert De Niro's in it. And it just really shows the disconnect that can be between the everyday faithful boots on the ground. You know, you had like a big, like a missionary component to the film where the local culture is being introduced to Christ and what that looks like versus some totally disconnected cardinal in a high office, like decked out in regalia across the sea, making business decisions that ultimately caused people to die on the ground, that was sometimes in conflict with what the local leaders were doing, like grassroots. Mm-hmm. And they were actually doing God's work. And anyways, I'm thinking of a powerful scene towards the end. I want to give away the whole plot if people want to check it out, but there's this really powerful scene where, you know, the priest is holding up the monstrance and then gets felled, and, you know, it was, you know, someone picked it back up and kept going, even though they knew they were going to die too, probably. And it was just that respect for the transcendent and the importance of that, right? Not unlike how, if we, you know, you talk about the virtue of patriotism, and of course politics is, you know, inseparable from talking about the health of a country, that, you know, you ought to have respect for the flag and what it represents. And you know, these are important things to get back to, reclaiming the basics, as you've said.
I heard a story about a missionary who went to China, and he spent like 2 or 3 weeks there, and he wasn't a priest, he was just a lay missionary. So he was just, you know, bringing catechetical textbooks, just kind of seeing how things are going over there. I think they own like a daycare, his mission group or whatever. And he was staying with his family, and like at 3-4 in the morning, like half the village got up, and like there's commotion in the house, and he's like, I should probably go see what's going on, right? It's China. You never know. You hear things in the middle of the night. You get a little worried. So he got up, and the one woman just did this and was like, just like, follow us. They walked for like 1.5 miles into the woods. It's the middle of the night. It's pitch black. The forest outside of China. And this one guy, they look around like, okay, guy climbs up the tree, gives like a signal, like, we're good to go. This woman goes around what looked like just this like abandoned, just like cabin, and they knock down a piece of plywood, and there's a single Eucharist, and they all sat there for 2 hours in adoration, in silence, knowing that if anyone from the Communist Party showed up, they'd all be shot, no matter what their age, what their gender was.
Wow.
And that's reclaiming the basics, right? Being able to, that testimony to know where it comes from. That's why I guess we can go back into like redefining clericalism, but like, yeah, remember what office is the reason you're able to do that. And this was all lay people. There's no priest in sight. But they were lucky enough to save a priest came through town, celebrated Mass, and they managed to just keep one in a little pyx just for this reason, because they knew it might be another month and a half till a priest strolled through China again, who was, I hate to say it, dumb enough to go to China, because that's unfortunately the reality of it nowadays.
But we need boots on the ground everywhere, right? There's, you know, over 90% of citizenry are, you know, they don't identify with the current apparatus that runs things from the top. But, you know, it's challenging, right? And people ought to, I mean, we do need to get back to the basics if we're going to allow for the freedoms that we've, you know, so many people have fought so hard for to continue, especially in this technocratic 21st century era. Yeah. You know, AI is ascending. There's just so many things happening where we need to be at the helm of identifying how these goods and services are going to be implemented, you know, saying we don't want a social credit system or this or that, because, you know, unfortunately there's some, you know, a loud minority that just loves to control.
I'm a big advocate of reclaiming the beauty aspect of the Catholic faith, I'm a liturgical like vestment junkie. I love looking at like the cardinals with the copes that go for 50 feet behind them.
Why don't we see you at the Latin Mass more?
My schedule, man.
Your day job, you know.
Yeah, my day job kind of requires me to be elsewhere. But I love that. And you mentioned like the cardinal regalia sitting in office. I don't always agree with what that office has become and the decisions they're making, but I love looking at Cardinal Burke. He wears all. I think that's a subtle way of reclaiming the office. If you saw Cardinal Burke, and I forgot the name of their big red hat with 8 layers of vestments on, with this huge tail on it, walking into the local Wegmans,
referring to Father by his last name. Maybe we should have been in these like modern terms of like being a baby priest or whatever.
And like, just like you are a priest, and like again,
you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. You are in such a dignified munus.
And I think you are entitled to your time, to yourself. Like I said, you want to go golfing and dress like you, and I see nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying they can't, but take advantage of the opportunities when you can. If you're just going to leave Mass, run to the grocery store real quick, and then go back to your rectory because you need something to cook for supper, throw on all that stuff. That's going to be to someone, be like, that guy's got that office. Whatever he does, he's important. Look at the way he's dressed. Look at the people who are kissing his hands or going out of their way to shake his hand or to stop him and to say hi to him. Like this must be important, right?
But if someone needs extreme unction in the hospital, go delegate that to the pastoral associate, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Or the chaplain that you page 6 times and doesn't answer.
Oh. Tell me how you really feel, John.
Oh, I feel.
It's like pulling teeth to get what you're really thinking, you know? No, yeah. It's a breath of fresh air to chat with you and I have to ask this question because I can't imagine that anyone tuning in isn't thinking this. So I'll just say it on their behalf. Because some might say that you're a unicorn in some sense. I don't agree with this, by the way. I mean, I've seen a lot, but the sense that I get in, let's say, like traditional Catholic circles, you read the comments online or whatever, and you try to get a pulse on what people believe is true. And it's challenging when you're trying to critically think without sounding or becoming too conspiratorial, when you're trying to wonder what's coming next on the pipe, and you're trying to figure out where culture is going and how does this affect my family. These are important questions. They're very, very real. But I think a common theory out there is that if you love the traditional Latin Mass, which you've made very clear you love. You love traditional vestments. You love getting back to the basics in a sense where you're like, listen, we need to reclaim certain things that once were, and the modern political educational apparatus that's trying to make me push stories when I'm not even seeing behind the curtain doesn't want that. How are you? I mean, you have a day job in our local diocese at a church. You're doing quite well from what I understand. And, your pastor supports you and everything's fine, right? I feel like that goes against the narrative that a lot of people have, where they think that you're either diehard, on board with the traditional aspects of the faith, or you're going to get canceled. And somehow you're towing the line, though, right? Yeah. Here you are, you're pointing out that, this is the nonsense that happens when they try to essentially groom you in the journalism school. Here's what happens here. Here's what I don't agree with that's going on in the church. And yet you still have that day job. Why do you think that is?
I realize that I can make time to invest in what I really love, while also being with the people who need to go back to it, right? I go to a Novus Ordo Mass 7 days a week. And I'm the biggest Latin Mass fan I've ever encountered. But because we're Catholics right now that need to be recatechized, or just catechized to begin with, they're in the suburban Novus Ordo parishes. I think there's simple things I've been fortunate to do with the authority I've been given in my position to make subtle changes that I think, I'm not going to see it in this generation, right? Because the older generation that is involved in the church are very post-Vatican II, they're the ones who built these churches. They're going to do it their way. But I think just setting the groundwork for the next generation that come, be like, oh, yeah, they're just going to inherently grow up with them again, like 5-6 generations ago did. 7 generations ago, you inherently grew up, and every Monday night you were walking up to the parish for your St. Anthony novenas and your rosary, right? It was just inherently what you were. You went to Mass on Sundays, and we've gotten away from that. So if you start laying the seed work now in very subtle ways, it's just going to be what people grow into. So I think that's why I enjoy what I do.
No question.
And I'll give you just a simple example.
Sure.
I have mixed opinions on the office of extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, right? I see the benefit of them because we're able to reach so many homebound and hospitals and nursing homes, and it does make Mass flow a little better, especially when you go to a parish that has 500-600 people in Mass. It does make it easier if the priest didn't have to give out communion to 500 people on his own. But there's been a little bit of an abuse where, like, I mean, I've seen people who aren't commissioned to do that just take communion and go.
Oh, sure.
And like little things
I've seen priests be like, is anybody here able to administer our Lord? And there's a huge inherent assumption there that that person has truly been trained.
They're chalking it up to just
anyone could just be like, yep. Or maybe depending on how it's said, they don't realize.
They don't understand what they're actually saying. Yeah.
Right. Like, no, I'm asking for someone that's actually been trained in this. And by the way, I mean, that's something that my understanding is in the original rubrics, it's extraordinary meant outside of the context of the liturgy.
Extraordinary outside the context of the liturgy, and in the liturgy.
In other words, it's not supposed to even happen in the liturgy.
Yes, and there's been differentiatings on that. A lot of it was left up to local ordinaries, so every office of worship and every diocese can kind of use that as they are. So, like, it's approved in the Diocese of Buffalo for an extraordinary minister in the context of liturgy at the pastor's discretion to distribute under both species.
Well said. Good work.
Only if there isn't enough ordinaries that the pastor deems doable. There's a lot of words in, like, canon law and the German stuff that are last up, like pastoral need. Like, in the case of extreme pastoral necessity, Eucharist, extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion can be used to distribute communion, right? So if you're going to have a Mass at your lawn fete and you're expecting 1,000 people, yeah, you're going to want to plan ahead of time to have 8-9 communion stations, right? Because it's just, you can't expect communion to take 30 minutes, right? It's just not realistic in what's going on. But daily Mass, where you got maybe 20 people, I'd argue the priest is fine by it. A priest and a deacon's fine. Or reteaching people, like, sometimes another priest, there's retired priests that live all over the area, and they might just show up and be like, hey, I need to go to Mass. I'm a baptized Catholic, and they'll can celebrate Mass, and I think that's great. I love seeing that happen. They have the first right to distribute communion. They're the ordinary minister.
Priests deacons were originally supposed to be the extraordinary ministers.
Yeah, the deacons helped the process, and then we branched off from there. But like I've tried to lay down basic foundations of like, hey, you four are scheduled to help at this Mass, and that's awesome, and I appreciate you for being here. But if another priest or deacon walks in that door, one of you is not needed. And that's been a real pushback of, this is my job, I'm on the schedule or whatever. And it's like those basic little things we can reclaim of like, I'm sorry, he has the right because of the office he holds to distribute communion. Don't insult him in his office because you want to do something. And that's where it goes back to, again, if priests were a little bit more just a notch up from everyone else in society where there is that understanding of the office, you wouldn't tell Father no. I mean, my grandfather taught me, a staunch Italian Catholic, right? Like old school Italian Catholic guy. God rest his soul. I was taught you never say no to a priest. That's just how I was taught. You don't, if Father asks you to do something, whether it's he needs you to come over and cut his grass.
Which, by the way, that's similar to your own dad, right?
Yeah,
you
just that respect. You show that respect. If Father asks you to come and he needs help cutting his grass, he needs help moving some furniture, he asks you to do something around the parish, your answer is always yes, Father. Right, within reason, like everything else, but like, but you just say yes because it was ingrained in me. There is a certain level of office and special uniqueness about this individual. If he calls me up, 100% Father, I'll be there in an hour.
He's a man's man, and he's not asking you to sin, right?
Absolutely.
And there's no scandal there in the sense of, this is a real person.
If as soon as we're done, my phone says, Father texts me saying, hey, can you stop at the grocery store and pick up some eggs? Absolutely, I'm stopping at the store to pick Father up some eggs. Right. I don't want to, but I'm going to because Father asked me to pick up some eggs.
Sure.
Right? And sure, maybe that was abused for a couple of centuries, and that's why they fought so hard to end this concept of clericalism. But I think within reason, I think it's healthy. And teach your kids that too. We're going to go over to the rectory and we're going to cut Father's grass because that's what we're doing as a family today. We're going to go plant some new flowers in the garden better instead of you buying a new couch every 6 months because you're an upper middle class suburban mother. Hey, we're going to take this over to the rectory and see if Father wants it first. We're going to try and upgrade his living conditions first. And that basic stuff's just been lost.
Well, one thing I can further develop with you, and this is the only reason, that I, push back on what definition we want to utilize when it comes to reclaiming this concept surrounding clericalism as we have here now in this working conversation. One of the reasons that clericalism ended up becoming condemned is because, and this is purely like a theological development perspective. I mean, a lot of what we're doing right now so far has been like a pastoral considerations. I'm stepping back and going into like a theological realm, and a lot of it surrounds our understanding of prayer, right? Which is, people realize that's one of my like areas of expertise. So I'm constantly meditating on these ideas. And what you had, a lot of this started with St. Francis de Sales, right? 1500s or so, thereabouts. And, feast day, January 24th, awesome doctor of the church. And he's kind of like known as the doctor of the laity, where he started to really popularize this idea that there's certain aspects of the spiritual life that are available to everyone, not just the clerics. And so he kind of planted some seeds there. But in the centuries following, there ended up being, like, if you study like Scaramelli and others, the big writers on prayer and the development of prayer, there ended up being this popularization of the idea, and again, post St. Teresa of Avila, which was 1500s, where, she defined those 9 levels of prayer, right? Like vocal prayer, mental prayer, affective prayer, prayer of simplicity, mystical contemplation, prayer of quiet, prayer of union, prayer of conforming union, prayer of transforming union. That's level 9, eternal beatitude beginning in this life. And with those 9 levels of prayer, St. Teresa taught how the first 4 are accessible to us all in the here and now by our own volition. But the upper 5 levels, you need to essentially reach a point through the passive purgation, it's called, where God will infuse higher levels into you as long as you are cooperating with his will and you're continuing to develop and advance on the path to Christian perfection. What happened in the centuries following St. Francis de Sales is a lot of writers created this rift between the first 4 levels of prayer that you can affect on your own and the top 5 levels of prayer. And what they would say is that the laity have access to the first 4 levels, and the clerics only get to do the top 5. And the way that they would distinguish these two things is they would say that the first 4 levels of prayer are what's called the ascetic way to perfection, and the upper 5 levels are the mystical way to perfection. And that's hogwash. And by the way, just to put a pin on it, and I'll kick it back to you, that was finally asserted at the Second Vatican Council when Vatican II said, the universal call to holiness. A lot of people don't realize it's kind of like, John 3:16, right? Like, for whosoever loves the Son, has eternal life. Like, that's a zipped folder, I like to say, as a technical person.
Yeah.
You have to unzip that, and that means following all of his precepts, following everything he taught, which of course includes adhering to the Catholic Church. And that's what Protestants don't realize. So too, when Vatican II definitively taught about this idea of the universal call to holiness, that's a zipped folder. And if you unpack that, what's included in that is the church finally, once and for all, settled a centuries-long debate where you had this unhealthy clericalism where there was that kind of disconnect between the laity and the clergy. Like, the clergy are this this transcendent other that have these special powers that the rest of us don't have access to. And I'm thankful for the development of Holy Mother Church to, weed out the very fascinating and intelligent thinkers that weighed in on prayer, and to finally solidify and to further develop in the right direction what St. Teresa of Avila meant by those biblical realities, what St. Francis de Sales was getting at.
I take the Ratzinger approach to Vatican II, where it's beautiful, we just did it wrong. To put it briefly,
some call it Spirit of Vatican II, right?
Yeah, right. Whatever. But I think one of the advancement on prayer in the universe called to holiness was so. And this is why I don't hate Novus Ordo parishes. I love that they gave the lay people liturgy the hours. I think the lectionary was the greatest gift of the 20th century to the church. You hear 98% of scripture if you go to mass every day for 3 full years. most people didn't ever do that. Like, that's such a new thing to people. Like, and that all these beautiful things that did come out of Vatican II, we just need to...
The percentage of scripture at a Catholic liturgy, Novus Ordo or traditional, is much higher than you standardly get at different Protestant
absolutely. I mean,
offerings.
and we did drop off a lot. I mean, you've probably watched Mass of the Ages, which I think is one of the best film series made. Yeah, like 70% of what was said in a Tridentine Mass is scriptural, and now we're down to like 42, 45 or something like that. It's still good. There's a decrease, but you're still hearing so much of it every week, and I think that's beautiful. I don't care what language it's in. I just think it's beautiful that it's out there and that people can... I use the Magnificat as my daily prayer. Like, my personal prayer life is really built around going to Mass every day. I pray the Rosary, I pray the Chaplet sporadically. I'm not as dedicated every day to it. I've never done like a Marian consecration, anything like that, or a Joseph consecration. That's just never been where my spirituality's lied. Like, my spirituality's always been in the Mass. If I start my day with morning prayer, 5 minutes of silent, reflective, contemplative prayer, and then go to Mass, receive communion, I'm golden. I feel like I can conquer the world.
Right.
And so because of that, the Magnificat's nice because it has a condensed morning prayer. It's got a saint of the day. It's got the Mass readings. It's got a reflection on the readings, and then it's got a condensed evening prayer.
Beautiful. And they're not paying you to say this.
They're not paying me to do this, but I'll take a job at Magnificat if they're listening.
There you go. You've heard it here, folks. Brother Molik would either love to work with or for Jordan Peterson or Magnificat.
I'll be Jordan Peterson's coffee guy. I just want to sit in the room with him and pick his I want to drive him around. I want to be his driver and just ask him questions the whole time he's going everywhere.
There you go.
But I think there's something beautiful that can be said to that balance between the Novus Ordo communities and the Tridentine communities and Vatican II. And I think Matthew Levering wrote a book on the theology of Vatican II, which I don't think is that bad of a book.
Okay, I don't have any context, so I can't
Ratzinger wrote a famous book 20 years at post-council of like where we're at 20 years post-council and where he thinks we went wrong and where he should, and this was written in the early 90s.
Sure.
And then I bought the Word on Fire edition of the 4 main constitutions of the Vatican II, and Bishop Barron writes his introduction and thoughts into each of them. And I think those 3 books should be mass-produced and given out in modern-day catechetical classes as like, here's what Vatican II wanted.
Do you think we have a reasonable hope that all are saved?
I can't get on board with universalism. I don't.
He claims he's not a universalist.
He can claim all he wants, but he's wrong. I mean, God bless the man for everything he's done. And you can claim. I mean, I can claim I'm not a man. I'm not a narcissist, and other people are gonna just tell me straight as it is, right? I mean, that's the reality of free will.
You can be a man and not a narcissist, hopefully.
Oh yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what I think we should all shoot for.
We should all shoot for that.
Yeah.
Universalism and that, I think Divine Mercy was a beautiful, like the Faustina story and the Marian Fathers and the whole Divine Mercy story through Kolbe and John Paul. I think that's a beautiful testament of the faith, right? I think it really saved the church in the 20th century. I think it's been taken, the Divine Mercy movement has become such a laity-driven movement. I think it's become too commercialized that, yeah, God is so full of mercy. We're all fine, right? That's what they
covered
miss
in the blood
it.
of the Lamb. That's that.
Yeah, we're all good, and I think that maybe be the downside of some of the more modern day Divine Mercy movements. I think what the Marian Fathers are doing are brilliant. I think everyone should reflect on Faustina's diary.
MICs or G's.
Yeah. Oh, the great priests. Everything they do. I went to Stockbridge maybe 3 years ago, and it was one of the best experiences of my life.
Very beautiful setup. The way they have like Guadalupe image over the altar and.
We couldn't go into the chapel as they're during COVID.
Okay.
So the chapel was closed. So we went to Mass in the conference room. Like they did a traveler's Mass, but it was all the junk with the mask and everything else. But
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. By the way,
the cool thing I love about Stockbridge was the life-size Stations of the Cross.
Yep.
I think praying and meditating the Stations of the Cross is a lost art. It's not just reserved for Lent. I know a lot of people who abstain from meat every Friday and pray the Stations every Friday. They just preserve Friday to fasting, abstaining, and contemplating on the Passion. And maybe that's, again, reclaiming the basics. Maybe I just wrote a chapter out loud.
Boom, let's go, baby.
Again, there's
so many ways.
The simple practice. They're simple. We're not asking a lot.
As long as you're doing something, In the East, they don't, when they abstain or no meat, that includes no eggs.
Yeah.
fish.
They're basically
You know what I
vegans
mean?
for the day.
They go hard, and that's an ancient practice. So I mean, there's always ways to go deeper.
Can we please incorporate the Chotsky from the East?
Yeah, the Chalky. Yeah,
I love the simplicity of just repeating, like,
I don't have my nominee
Lord
right now,
Jesus,
but
Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Just the Jesus prayer. Like, it's simple.
I pray that every single night before bed.
I think that's beautiful. I'm
It
not that.
staves off nightmares pretty well.
What I think that's more beautiful at that is, I think, again, we can get back into how, like, the attention span and the West and everything like that is how bad. As beautiful, I don't want to take anything away from the rosary and how beautiful it is and how everyone should pray the rosary every day. The modern attention span is more attuned to something like that than the rosary.
I see what you mean. Well, all right. So
There's beauty in both, but I think
No
if
question.
you want to start, if you want to evangelize to if you want to evangelize to the current state of Western society, the East is doing a better job than the West.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shameless plug to East to West theology at this point. I don't know if you've ever caught
I have.
So maybe it'd be better for you to speak to it than me. But overall, what we aim to endeavor to do there, it's me and my brother Dennis G. We endeavor to breathe with both lungs of the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, in the vein of St. John Paul II, who called for all Catholics to do so. And so, I mean, you're not gonna hear any lip from me about the importance of doing both the Rosary and the Chalky.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we can incorporate little things like that.
Did you learn anything from it? What was the biggest takeaway from whatever you did capture?
My biggest takeaway was how we're so similar but so different. And I think there's different aspects depending
But not
on
in bad ways.
Not in a bad way. I think in what area of theology you're looking to accomplish, or philosophy, or in life, I think I don't think there's a single area where the East and the West both do things in an appropriate manner. I think the West does, like,
Do you mean like fully appropriate, or
maybe not appropriate, it's not the right word, but maybe like the best practices. I think when it comes like marriage,
like one superior over the other?
one superior over the other. I think you look at every aspect.
I reject that as well. That's one of the things I think radical traditionalists go too far. I got to throw something controversial in here because I put you on the spot with Bishop Barron and whatever.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm happy to kit and play and to treat others the way I'd like to be treated, in the sense that I remember watching when he came out with the qualifier wordonfire.org/hope, and he had to create an entire Q&A because he got so much shade for that controversial stance. And there was one piece where they appealed to the Fatima prayer in order to say, do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Have you been on that site?
I have, yeah.
When they're like, you see, look at what the Sister Lucia asked of us, like we pray at the end of rosaries ever since the 20th century. We say, "Oh my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell, and lead all souls to heaven, especially those in most need of thy mercy." And they say that is a proof that we have a reasonable hope that all are saved, meaning that everyone goes to heaven, which of course is not biblical. It's also condemned by the church historically. If anybody wants to look up the famous sermon of St. Leonard de Port Maurice on the fewness of the saved, the Catholic Church weighed in. This was in the 1800s. They said this homily has full approbation of the church. In other words, everything that you're being taught in this homily is what the Catholic Church teaches. And it makes clear that at least 50% of people may not make it. And that goes back to the words of our Lord. Wide is the gate that leads to perdition. Narrow is the gate that leads to eternal life. It's not, it's not because God, desires that. He doesn't desire that. He wills that all be saved. But to appeal to the Fatima prayer and to say that is a proof that one is comfortably able to assert that all are going to end up in heaven when all is said and done is... I mean, that's just like intellectually daft on its face. That's not like the Fatima prayer is clearly referring to making a petition for those of us still here in the church militant.
That's
Like, I thought that was pretty obvious for anybody with, like, even a rudimentary catechetical upbringing.
That's almost as dumb as people who say there's no reason to pray like the St. Michael prayer anymore because like possessions only happened in like the Renaissance era and they stopped. There's a big movement nowadays that the St. Michael prayer doesn't have a place in the Mass. And you know, some parishes are reclaiming the praying the St. Michael prayer after Mass. There's a big movement say there's no place for that in the Mass. It's unnecessary.
I'm comfortable with being at my low Masses where it's just kind of cooked in.
Yeah, it's just part. And that, you know, in what I tell my advice to people who have petitioned their pastors and he won't bring it to Mass, include it in your rosary. No matter what your prayer form is, fit the St. Michael prayer into it. Like I have like 4 bookmarks in my Magnificat that I pray at the end of evening prayer. Like one's for the canonization of Nelson Baker because I'm a Buffalo boy, so I have to, right? And there's my daily novena to the Blessed Mother. And then in there, I'd say if I didn't go to Mass where they said the St. Michael prayer, throw that St. Michael prayer card in there. Make it a part of your daily routine. You know, if the church is going to fight you against it, doesn't mean you have to stop.
Well, let's just take a step back for a moment because, you know, the purpose of this podcast, this movement is just to build people up, to add value into the community. And it's unfortunate that there are some of these, you know, concerns that are taking place, but I would love to really focus on solutions. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, it's super easy to lament the state of things. It's a lot harder to say, hey, I want to acknowledge it, but I don't want to stay there, right? Because that's what evangelization is, right?
Yeah.
In fact,
yeah.
You know, when Jesus met the Samaritan woman at the well, like, I'm going to meet you where you're at, but I'm not keeping you here. I'm bringing you to a place of hope, to a place of faith, to a place of charity.
The thief on the cross.
And right. So we've touched on a pain point that, quite frankly, a lot of people might not have the courage to even go there.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not going to stay there. And, you know, we ought to, you know, vie for solutions. So if I may, I'm going to share something with you, and then I just want to get your take on it. My spiritual director and I had a conversation one time where I was just straight up with him. I was like, hey, please explain to me why I don't know if I've ever heard a homily in my life without, you know, going online and seeking out, you know, what some might identify as traditional, whatever, but just Catholic homily on the evils of contraception. Right? The latest Pew Research says that approximately 9 out of 10 Catholics contracept, which PSA, you know, that's objective grave matter, and shows that we are in what some might bill a crisis, right? Because if 9 out of 10 people are doing something that objectively is hellbound, then you have to be super careful about where you get your information and parsing out and discerning what's really true, right? And what Father told me was, and this really surprised me, right? Like, we haven't even gotten into Dynamis yet. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, you know, your involvement with Dynamis over the times. Mm-hmm. But Dynamis is a young adult ministry that I've been sanctioned to bring to the community, and we specifically focus on young adults to add value to our region, right? And not only did my spiritual director say, okay, here's why you don't hear these homilies. But the thing that surprised me even more was he said, I want you to share this with people publicly, which is why we're here right now. Okay? That's why I'm sharing this with you. He basically said that priests nowadays are afraid. They are made to be afraid to kowtow to really vanilla homilies, because if you do something beyond the bounds, I've even heard people that try to emphasize the St. Michael prayer, which is why you got me on this aside. And certain percentages of the congregation don't like the change. Mm-hmm. They make noise about it, and it gets word to, let's say, a liberal bishop or whoever, someone that's just, you know, you want effective, virtuous leadership at the top. You hope and pray that that's the case. Sometimes, unfortunately, in reality, it's not always the case, right? And if there's a dynamic there where there's a concern, the priest will either be shelved he'll be told you're relieved of duty, or he might be transferred somewhere where there's far less people that are being impacted by that desire for a powerful faith message, right? Like, contraception is just extremely dangerous. Don't do it. A lot of people don't know that nowadays. That's why we need to be super adamant about talking about it frequently until we fix that issue, right?
Yep.
Because, by the way, in the chain of causation, it causes the abortion. It's the prerequisite to abortion, right? Because if it's like, oops-a-daisy, the contraception didn't work, now you're murdering babies. And everything else that comes after it, all forms of sexual deviancy. It's a serious issue. It's a life or death issue, literally. But unfortunately, because it's so seductive, people just think, oh, well, I just want to follow a passion, and this makes it easier to do that, right? They don't ever get beyond that initial lower sensibility. And so anyways, long story short, I want to kick it back to you and get your take on this, because it's fascinating. You literally work for the church, you have for years, and you're in good standing, as am I, running a ministry, right? And yet we want to take seriously, like, shedding a spotlight on these very real concerns. And essentially what Father left me with was, priests are shackled right now, and they're super careful about what they share from the pulpit, because all it takes is that one time where you get people that call in and say, I didn't like that, and all of a sudden they're sidelined, and they might go through a 5-year appeal process with the Vatican, and it's the only thing they have to appeal to. And he said, please share this with people, because we want to do better for you all. We want to be there for the flock, but we need you all to stand up and let us know that you've got our back. And it takes all of us in the 21st century in order to get us to the tomorrow we want to see. What are your thoughts on that? Does that sound conspiratorial? Does that sound beyond the pale? Should I get a new spiritual director?
No, I think there's I got 3 main things to say to that. I think the first one would be, that's how far we've gotten with the separation of church and state in America, where people use the coverall that that's not the church's position to do that, leave that up to legislation. Like, you tell me how, you teach me how to pray and all that fun stuff, but let's leave real problems to legislation, right? And I think that's just a misconception. I think another thing it's important, I think you kind of said to it, was you need to help alleviate the stress on priests, right? Because there is a lot of stress on priests. And I think I've been able to take advantage of the West and how easy it is to convince people of things nowadays.
He said it.
With the short attention span and just how media works, I think there's little ways we can do by obviously, if we're talking contraception, let's just talk about Paul VI and Humanae Vitae, right? I think every parish, let's say you run your parish's social medias because you're the young kid, and so Father thinks you know how Facebook works and how websites work. Just put a link to these things on websites. People naturally on the internet just go down rabbit holes. How many times did you start watching a YouTube video on the moon landing and then end up on Elton John's last concert at Yankee Stadium? Because that's just how YouTube works, right?
You're speaking for someone out there.
Same with internet browsing. I think, on my parish website and on our parish app, there's a link to the Western New York Catholic, the Vatican website, the USCCB. I hope someone's bored and just clicks on that Vatican website, clicks on encyclicals, and stumbles across it. I've done my part to get the message out there. I've tried to alleviate stress from Father, and I didn't put anyone into a weird position to cause a greater scandal or issue. And this is a big thing I took into consideration with my discernment process. I spent some time looking at religious life in the priesthood.
Sure.
The big thing for me was I hate education. I'm not going to school for 8 years. That ain't happening. Okay. My other thing was I'd cause more harm as a priest because I'd be so dividing. I'd get up in the pulpit and say contraception's wrong, and then I'd drive out half my parishioners, and I'd cause a huge scandal at a parish that I was entrusted to keep together, right? That's the mission of a pastor, is the spiritual well-being of a...
Why would that be so divisive?
Just like you said, though, all it takes is someone who thinks that's not my priest's place to tell me what to do, someone who's a little maybe weaker up and coming in their faith, who isn't at that point to accept that kind of truth, and they call the chancery, or they call the priest next door, or they just go to the parish next door, because Father next door, all of his homilies are just how much God and Jesus loves you, and we're all a 365 VBS.
Well, I definitely don't advocate for throwing Molotov cocktails at people, but I think that there's a finesse and a prudence with which you ought to not water down basic truths. Going back to the basics.
Correct. Don't water down basic truths, but I think as a layperson, we're able to be as decisive, no matter if you're in an authoritative position in the church or not. You can take that stance because it's ultimately not going to be kicked back on the overall parish or cause. The last thing you want to see is people aren't coming to church as it is. You don't want to drive people away from Mass who are there. So if it's easier to just lay the framework of Catholic teachings through holding Bible studies, through hosting a parish podcast, through links on a website or where people can come to this stuff on their own, and maybe Father just allude to it. I think one of the best things a priest does nowadays is, like, it's election season. Most priests I know, go visit the usccb.org. They have a comprehensive election tab on how you as a Catholic should vote. They just saved themselves from pissing off the left or the right? Because they simply just said, you have free will. I have faith that you have morals, you've been educated, and I've done my best to teach you what's right, but go look at the facts and you make a conscious decision as to who you want to run your country. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that's a healthy solution in the time we're in right now. I think with how on edge everyone is in the church, people leave the church over being told they're not needed as a Eucharistic minister at Mass. If that's all it takes for someone to give up on coming to Mass, I'd rather tread lightly in the current situation instead of having every priest get up to Sunday and say contraception's bad. Maybe make alluding to there's a vast amount of good Catholic resources on the internet. Why don't you take some time this evening while you're laying in bed to scroll on your iPad and check out some of these documents from the church and how important it is to revisit some of the Holy Fathers from the past and the saints and the martyrs.
Well, I wholeheartedly echo your sentiment that, prudence is at the utmost, right? You have to start with the virtue prudence. That's why the Catechism calls it the charioteer of the virtues, mm-hmm. right? Because it's like it guides the rest of the decisions that you make. So I totally resonate with that. I guess the part that conflicts me or concerns me is this idea that you've really got priests out there that are saying, we can't do things that we used to do because we are in very extraordinary circumstances. Yep. We need your help to do these things. I honestly would rather see Father get back to doing everything that he ought to be capable of doing in the first place. So there's got to be this synergy.
But I think that's where Father gets up in the pulpit at your parish and says, hey, are you a young person? Check our bulletin for information on Dynamis if you want to learn deeper in the Catholic faith. Right? That's how you help each other. You tackle the issues you want to tackle in this podcast at your Dynamis meetings, tackle whatever harsh truth reality of the church it is. It protects Father, but it's also not you're still adhering to our responsibility to proclaim and defend the truth. It's just a different avenue than what we were used to. I visit the Presbyterians and Methodist pastors who founded this country quite frequently. There was a movement called the Black Robe Regiment, and it came about during the Revolutionary War. And like 30% of soldiers who enlisted in the Revolutionary War was after their Methodist or Presbyterian pastor got up in the pulpit, held a gun, and said, who's joining me? We're going to go fight for our God-given rights. America won the Revolutionary War because of Presbyterian and Protestant pastors who got up in the pulpit and said, God says we're entitled to these freedoms. Our government in this country is going to be based off God's divine law, not the Parliament in England.
If I may, though, notice you just said it was the pastors who had that courage.
It was the pastors, which is important, but that was a whole different time. In these early revolutionary towns, the only person who was on our scale now who had above a fourth grade education was the pastor. They're the ones who founded Brown, Harvard, Cambridge. They're the ones who were educated. Protestant pastors were the only ones who had any lick of any knowledge whatsoever. Sure. So everyone showed up in the church on Sundays. Everything he said was gold because he was the only one intelligent enough to read or talk to you guys. So it worked that way. Nowadays, that's not the case anymore. So going down that route of priests looking for opportunities to defer to, or pastors who do a really good job of holding parish missions or retreats, like bringing in someone like Dr. Scott Hahn, Dr. John Bergsma, like let them do the work. They're much more educated. Let them do the groundwork. Let's help each other in this Catholic sphere.
Right.
Don't put everything on Father anymore, because there isn't a common understanding in society that Father is the smartest man in this room and everything he touches and says is gold. And that goes back to the office has been tainted. We don't look at it the same way we used to.
Well, and there's a balance there, right?
Absolutely.
Because back to the whole working definition of clericalism, we want to see Father get back to, having the respect that he's deserved, and that comes with having a true command, right, over anything that it is that he ought to be able to do. And quite frankly, I think a priest should have carte blanche on teaching any and all aspects of Catholic morality. I don't think there should be a filter there. That's just me, maybe. I don't know. And again, in prudence and at right time, right place, right? That's what prudence is. It's the right thing at the right time, under the right circumstances.
I just think there's so much to cover in the Catholic faith. I think the Sunday homily really needs to be reserved for like an exegesis on the scriptures, how this applies to your life, a very coverall pastoral message on here's how I want to inspire you to go out and live the gospel for the next 7 days to return to me, right? That's what you do in a homily. And I think that's where you...
And then on a Sunday, guys like you and I, dressed as we are, go golfing.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
And then we talk about whatever. But that's where Father then on a Tuesday night makes it very clear, hey, if you really want to learn more about your faith, I'm going to open up the rectory living room, put a pot of coffee on. You want to come over, bring up any hot button topic, and I'll give you the Catholic faith, but fair warning, you might not like it, or it's different than what you've been taught your whole life. But do it in that setting. So then the people who come are at least open-minded enough to maybe they're not going to get completely upset at what's said or be like, wow, I've never heard that before. They might be relatively surprised. And I think that's where you said the prudence. Find the right time in the week to do certain things. I think that's why Bible studies started, parish missions started. There are windows to get into hot button topics and issues. And I just finished up teaching a 4-week class on death, heaven, hell, purgatory. I did the 4 last things. And we looked at scripture and the evolution of the definition of the word death and the definition of the word hell, just so on and so forth, from the Hebrew to the Latin all the way up to the English, and how it changed and how this...
I'd say all the way down. Hierarchically,
all the way down, and then and how that interacts with like what the Catechism teaches, why this is in the Catechism and stuff like that, and like that was the proper place and time to do that.
Right.
I'm not saying don't give a fire and brimstone homily on hell once a year. I think every pastor should do that. But you know what? I was able to accomplish a lot more over 4 weeks in a controlled group with people who wanted to be there to learn than if Father got up on Sunday and gave that exact same spiel. Hey, people are also go back. I hate to keep blaming the attention span, but go back to the attention span. If you went on a 20-minute exegesis and a 20-minute like looking at the history of this word, people are tuned off after 5 minutes.
Sure. No,
do it in the right setting.
Homiletics is an art. Right?
Homiletics is the hardest art that any human's gonna ever.
That's why it's like low-hanging fruit, like just bringing up the local sports team. It's just like really.
Yep.
But also, length can be important.
That 7 to 10 minute mark that every priest strives for is.
Even then, that's subjective, right? Because there's certain. I really don't like to use the term traditional.
That's a terrible.
Like Catholic is Catholic, you know what I mean? But there are communities that are adept at actually, having a better attention span, a la the Middle Ages when it was the norm.
Yeah.
That like a 20 to 50 minute homily. I mean, I know I've sat down for many of those.
I envy the concept.
Some of the best I've ever gotten.
I envy what priests were able to do in the Tridentine Mass where there was an election. Now the understanding is you're going to preach on the readings of the weekend, right? And slowly through 3 years of coming, you have opened up all of Scripture and salvation to your people if they come every single Sunday for 3 years, right? That's the whole concept behind the lectionary.
Sure.
So of course, do that. That's your job now. I get that. I envy in the Tridentine Mass where it's the same readings, where you can do series, right? Like it's not uncommon for Father to be like, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to cover 4 out of the 7 cardinal virtues, and then it doesn't have to be about the readings. It doesn't have to be about. It's just we're going to talk about prudence this week. We're going to talk about chastity next week, and he just builds and builds and builds and builds. And I think that
4 cardinal virtues, 3 theological.
And I think that's where we created parish missions out of now. That's your opportunity to do that. You're going to bring in a priest, and he's going to give 7 talks over 3 days, and he's going to cover the 7 virtues.
Sure.
Because you can't do that on Sundays because you need to cover the lectionary. Because I think that's important. I think you need to cover the lectionary readings. Whether or not they think it's the right thing or two, I truly think Vatican II got that right in how they redesigned homiletic teachings in seminaries is, focus on exegesis, focus on Scripture. It's the best thing we have.
Well,
teach people to understand it.
One thing's for sure, right? Trying to bridge these divides, perhaps even within Holy Mother Church. We've thrown around a lot of different concepts, and I keep just imagining in my mind that depending on where people stand on the aisle, they're going to have perhaps even a radically different reaction to some of these things. I just want to reiterate, and trust me here, man, like there are a lot of people out there on certain sides of the aisle, if you will, that would be dumbfounded to find out that you are this vocal about what you truly believe. And you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation how you are still on a journey to figure out where you land in all of this. But you're putting in the effort to do that. I really commend you for that. It's one thing I've always appreciated, getting to know you over the years. Because, there's like a man's man component that's inherent in that. And, you can't fake that authenticity. And, we could make a whole episode about how the, postmodern culture is literally trying to target and take that down. And it's despicable. But, I just want to reiterate just for a moment here, like you are in good standing in the church, as am I, and you are vocal and you have criticisms, and probably the vast majority of which are just, and the rest of them are just you trying to figure stuff out. And the fact that you're even willing to do that, I mean, you're not canceled, you're active, you are adding value in so many different areas in the community. I think that there are certain people out there that don't believe that someone like you exists or can exist in the Catholic space. And that's unfortunate because we need much more of this.
The best thing I learned, I can speak to that, is I got a sneak peek of one of the other episodes that'll be released either before or after this while I was waiting to talk to you for this conversation.
Sure.
And I briefly heard about friendships. And I won't get into it because they need to listen to that episode, or if it's out already, they've heard what you've talked about.
Carte blanche, man. Get into whatever you want.
But that the best thing I've done is balance out. I've seen the downfall of people who surround themselves only with like-minded people. Whether even in the Catholic sphere, people think like, oh, my life and my family's gonna be great if I just surround myself with Catholics. I call it the Steubenville curse. And I love Steubenville. I've been to like 10 or 12 conferences.
Start telling us how you really feel, John.
I've been to like 10 or 12 conferences there. I love the campus. Sure. I mean, two of our friends are Steubenville people, and I have nothing but admiration for everything Steubenville's done.
Sure.
But everyone I know who went to Steubenville either like married someone from Steubenville or their kids go to Steubenville and then they marry someone from Steubenville. So there's like this giant Catholic network, and it's beautiful. I love that there's that many people that are dedicated to like.
Not all cults are evil.
Not all cults are evil. No, yeah. and I love how beautiful it is
glad
that
you laughed at that.
They're making a valid attempt to surround their kids with just good Catholic families, and they want other Catholic families, and that's healthier. But in the rapidly changing 21st society that is so far away from anything else, be careful of putting yourself in a bubble. I have friends on all sides of everything. My fiance isn't baptized at all. She's been to church 3 times in her life. But you know what? She's taught me more about my own faith because she isn't just feeding me the same Catholic stuff that I already know and I want to strive for. She's the one who keeps me in the loop. She's the one who sends me TikToks about different trends going on, so then I can discern them and process out how the church needs to respond to this and then formulate and do my job.
Sure.
And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm trying to do, is to find the balance in between.
You need to tell her that if she can shift away from TikTok, we might have less of those Sony movies I was referring to earlier.
I've got a love-hate relationship with TikTok, but
Fair enough.
That ability to see both sides, and I'm super blessed that I was able to find a woman who is able to do that for me.
Sure.
She respects my journey and what I want to do, but she's definitely going to keep me in tune to 21st century Western culture, and that's important for someone who works on the ground in pastoral ministry, because I need to know what young people are thinking or what the philosophical trends are.
Sure.
I mean, anytime there's a big news story, I read what CNN writes and what Fox News writes, because you need to see it from both perspectives to have any concept of what the heck actually happened. Because like we mentioned at the beginning of this, you have no idea what actually is going on in other countries. You're just basing it off a news article. So I'm going to read 3 different sources. I'm going to read a far left, a moderate, and a far right. And I'm going to find 3 sentences that are the same in all of them and assume that's the actual truth of what happened.
Well,
and
be careful when some rich man behind the curtain's flipping that coin that represents both sides.
Yep, and that's happening now. Rockefeller, man, they exist still.
Well, you mentioned, you're getting into psychiatry.
Yeah.
Maybe you could look up the history of the modern big pharma and how it was based off of your boy there that you're referencing, discovering that they could, commoditize and capitalize on petroleum products and that ended up becoming a boom because they had to shift the awareness away from herbs and, because you can't commoditize an herb.
No, you can't.
So
you can't commoditize anything God naturally gave us, but we're finding a way to.
So yeah, I mean that's a whole nother
episode.
PhD, but well, hey, listen, man, congratulations.
Thank you
on your on your engagement. As long as you've gone there, maybe we can just close out on just some cultural things like. And feel free to take a pass if you want, but what is it like on the other side of the coin of that, right? You're saying I gained so much value from her ability to show me, the other side, so to speak. But how do you feel as a man of faith who, desires, her to be in heaven and everything else? Like, how do you wrestle with that? What have you learned?
We're only 25, right?
Good for you. That's
she's got 40 years, 50 years, ideally, before we even talk about the end of her earthly life. Oh, yeah, no. She's got 40 or 50 years until we have to even think about the end of her earthly journey, right?
God willing, yes.
People convert overnight. I got 40 or 50 years of God's grace, like I'm not worried about it. I don't think about it. It's not my place. Yeah. My place is to evangelize and to educate, but my place isn't to convert. Like, I didn't go into missionary priest. Like, I'm not an old Jesuit coming over to Orisville and going to the natives and saying you need to be Catholic or else, right? Like, that's not the path I chose. I'm just here to hey, there's just great stuff happening in the church, and you should be a part of it. And if you're not, as long as you're cool with this is how I live my life, and we can find common ground, and it's the balance. Like, my whole life is church, right? I work about church. My passions are church related. So then I just find the other balance.
Right.
We like to hunt. We like to go to concerts. We like to go camping. We like to just lay around and watch movies. We like to go eat takeout food. And that's the thing. We just talk about nonsense, and just it balances my life out. It's just the overall, again, learning something from the East, finding the balance, right? You need to give all aspects to be a complete, I guess maybe less the East, but the Renaissance man. I went to St. Francis. In freshman orientation, they tell you're going to leave here as a Renaissance man. That's the tagline they tell you, because they make you take an art, sports. Is that our
local St. Francis?
St. Francis High School, in Hamburg here. Yep. And they design your school experience where you experience every little thing where it's normal to do that. Our captain of our football team was usually the lead in our musical, who was also an honor student going to study engineering. So you got this scientist who was a lead in the performing arts, who was also a dominant athlete on the field, right? Renaissance, well-rounded.
I see it,
all
man.
aspects. So that was
you touched on that with the concept of your next book.
Yeah.
Coming out, right? Like, you're getting into faith, you're getting into economics, you're getting into politics, you're getting into all of this, and you're not shying away from it. I think that's a fantastic attribute to have.
Because we really want the faith to be the be-all, end-all of existence, right? If we want the Catholic Church to be the dominant force in everything, then someone has to sit down and figure out how it interacts with all these different things that exist. Because you're never going to be able to get rid of them. They're out there, right? You just need to find where the Catholic Church
inherently dominant.
Truth is always inherently dominant, and truth's going to prevail at the end.
Right? At
the end time.
Yeah, it's because someone might hear that and be like, "What? Like, you trying to take over some sort of a jihad?" It's like, nah,
No.
I think when something's inherently attractive, it speaks for itself. It doesn't need to be sold.
Yeah, and I think again, I'm not trying to get rid of capitalism. Be moral. If you make a lot of money, please take care of the poor who don't have the same opportunities as you. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not telling you can't make billions of dollars. Just take care of the poor. I'm not saying you can't study psychiatry and psychology and you get into all how your mind's wired, but realize that your mind is naturally wired to seek truth, and here is truth. So just link the two for me. Make my life easier.
Right. Don't fall into getting the kickbacks. Right?
All these little things. Again, your physical health is important. Go ahead, and I've got mixed opinions on yoga. I trust in your heart, if you're not intending for this to be a form of worship or prayer, that you're just stretching because you care about your physical well-being, and that's great because God calls you to care for the body that he gave you. Let's just blend.
And there's other people that have come out and said that they became possessed because of it.
That's true.
Because St. Paul in Romans, I think 1, it talks somewhere in the book of Romans talks about the gods of the Gentiles or the gods of the non-Jews are demons.
Yeah.
And objectively speaking, when you're doing those poses, those are poses of
mythological
deities.
gods and
deities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I mean, I agree yoga is dangerous, but at the same time, let's find the marriage. You want to practice this form of exercise because it increases your health and your well-being, right? There's a lot of scientific proof to yoga being beneficial to the human body. So let's find a way to just make this Catholic, and those programs exist. I forgot the name of it, but it's up at St. Francis Parish in Tonawanda. They do like the concept of yoga, but they pray the rosary while they do stretching. There's the blend, right? I'm not saying you need to get rid of this great thing that's going to always exist. The Catholic Church is never going to get rid of all of its enemies in this life. That's the whole point of what's to come, right? There's the reason the battle's coming in Revelations. We're never going to do all the work. So in the meantime, let's learn how to marriage them and live with them just to make it sustainable so everyone's on the same moral concept of like, hey, yeah, you want to. I'm glad you want to go out to the beach in the morning with 6 of your friends and take care of your body. I love that you're trying to do that.
Sure.
But let's find an appropriate middle ground to do this, and we're all set.
Yeah, there's a bone in me that's like I want to avoid enculturation, the idea of enculturation.
Of course,
there's valid concerns on both sides of the aisle if you look at early church history about the way in which, Catholicism takes root somewhere. And I think that there's a delicate balance there because freedom of conscience is something that is important.
Absolutely.
But you also need to have a well-formed conscience, right? You need to have both. And for me, I think sometimes integration into, keeping what's good but discarding what's not, objectively speaking, is what I'm hearing you say. And I think there's a time and place for that. And then there's also a time and place to be like, you know what, integrally, we should go with this structure. And, if there's anything that's not integral to goodness that's involved, maybe we ought to abandon this one. And so, and it's a constant discernment process.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And conversion too, right? Like every single day of our lives ought to be a day of conversion where we constantly learn something anew and we conform ourselves to that, philosophers and theologians' quest of following the truth wherever it leads you, regardless of that personal cost. It's
Absolutely.
Just so important.
I think you were talking about enculturation and kind of the blend in the discernment. That's my fear with the synod on synodality, which we talked about off camera of like, I've got some tire fire opinions on the synod. I think what the synod is leading us to is exactly that, enculturation. I think it's saying the church is going to conform to what we see in the West, because let's be honest, the West is the world, right? People don't even give credit to the East existing. The West is the world, and the way things are going, this is now the standard for living, so the church needs to find a way to...
You should get Dennis G on your podcast.
I'd have so much fun with Dennis.
Wouldn't that be great?
Because I love the East. I do. I have such a soft spot for the East. But the overall...
99% of the Catholic Church comprises the West currently, and 1% is the East, and all of the 23 or so rights that are acknowledged. So you're not wrong that there's a big imbalance right now.
And I'm not even talking theologically. I'm talking economically, culturally. Everyone just sees the West as like the world, right? Like if someone had to describe the world society in a sentence, it's going to be the West, right? America is the world, or so on and so forth. And I think the synod is just, that's the church's goal, is like they almost like giving up the fight. Like we're going to just incorporate ourselves into what this new society is, and we're going to do these ridiculous things such as ordaining women and same-sex marriages in the church and all these other just outrageous concepts. And I think it's an attempt to be more like the world instead of making them conform to the truth. And I fear the synod.
What do you think is the remedy?
I think the remedy is we hope for a change in leadership soon in the church. I don't want any... I respect Pope Francis. There's a lot of stuff he's written that I adore. He wrote a book called The Name of God is Mercy. One of the best books on sacramental confession and just the concept of forgiveness probably I've ever read in the church. I love some of his little sound snippets. Like I love his homily he gave on like priests need to smell like their sheep. Like, you need to smell like your flock because you need to be amongst them. Like there's little things that Pope Francis has done that's just been good. I mean, there's a lot of
Pastorally
negative.
on point.
Well, I always look at Pope Francis and say, like, I would love to have him as a parish priest. He's got to be the best small town pastoral parish priest in the world, the guy you want for 30 years at your parish. So you get married by him, he baptizes your kids, he baptizes and marries your grandkids, right? Like, you want that, like, generational family priest. Pope Francis is my man. I don't want him anywhere near making executive decisions on behalf of the Catholic faith ever again. That's not a strong point. And I think we see that a lot in the church. The right people get promoted and also the wrong people get promoted. And that's natural. It's human, right? As much as the Holy Spirit's involved in discerning who the bishops are going to be and the cardinals and stuff, there is still, you can't deny the human element. In the end of the day, there's still a group of guys who are going to sit down in a boardroom and they're going to decide this person deserves to be a bishop. You trust that they've prayed about it, that they've discerned it, that they've seeked other influences. But in the end of the day, it's 6 human dudes deciding, yep, this guy out in Arkansas, he's going to make a good bishop. We'll promote him. And I think sometimes we just off the mark. You look at guys like Strickland. Strickland's a godsend to the church. And then you look at maybe Francis and some of his inner cabinets, and you're like, why are you in Rome? Go to Argentina. You would be the best cardinal in Argentina if you would have stayed there. You would have changed the face of the church forever.
I spent a whole afternoon with Bishop Strickland, and it was definitely a highlight of my faith life because he makes a point to get to know every single person in a room.
Yes.
Wherever
I've been
he
with
goes.
him twice, and it's been awesome.
Yes.
And I've met, I think I'm up to 12 bishops I've met. Like, shook hand, hey, I'm going to have a conversation with you.
Right.
He's the only one that let me kiss his apostolic ring.
Really?
The only one. Out of all the other 11 were, like, pulled away, like, no, that's like not comfortable. And I'm like,
I've only had one that didn't allow me to.
and I'm like, you know how weird that is? Because, like, that's, as the laity who take their faith seriously, you need to remember that we're not reverencing you, we're reverencing your office. And for us, you are our connection to the apostles and to Peter and to everything that our church has ever taught and stands for.
Amen, brother.
You
Preach.
cannot take that away from us. Like, we're not, I don't care if you're uncomfortable with it. That's, you need to put aside your personal opinions and realize what office you're holding. This is super important to Catholics.
Well, if somebody's uncomfortable with that, then it means that there's a focus on the self.
Yeah, they think it's you.
Which
It's
is
like
completely foreign to the entire point.
And I think that's where Bishop Strickland gets it right. He realizes the value of the office he holds. That's why he went out to Los Angeles during June to protest the sacrilege at the Dodgers game. That's why he joined the men's walkout in Baltimore last year that I attended and was outside. We prayed the rosary outside the USCCB Fall General Conference and, like, protested in a light sense. I mean, that's what, liberal news outlets told us we did. We protest. We didn't protest. We just stand outside and prayed the rosary. The only bishop who came downstairs was Strickland. All the other bishops were upstairs in the meeting room, looking at us through the windows, and he came down and prayed the rosary with us and shook our hands and prayed with us.
Well, everyone ought to be very conscientious of the fact that there is a chain of causation that connects all of us together, whether or not you're in the mystical body of Christ now. And we are going to be held accountable for how what we did impacts others, right? Our Lord said, what you have done to the least of these, you have done to me directly. So I'm thinking back to that movie that I referenced earlier where, you had a cardinal who was essentially just making a business decision.
Yeah.
That's the vibe that happened in that room. But the effect of that cost people their lives.
And you might have to name this podcast like Debate on Clericalism or something. I'm going to keep going back to the point. I don't know why. It must be the Holy Spirit. But that, again, if we return to that concept of the understanding offices, they would realize the gravity of their doing. How many Catholics never get to shake a bishop's hand, let alone kiss the apostolic ring that ties them to their entire church? Because that ring in that hand was touched by someone who was touched by someone all the way back to the apostles. I mean, that's the beauty of, the consecration of a bishop, the ordination of a bishop, the episcopacy. The beauty of it is that someone's laying hands on you who had hands laid on by them all the way back to the 12.
And yet you've got people that get all psyched out about Reiki.
Oh.
It's like you've got some random Japanese dude from the early 1900s who came up with these goofy looking symbols, but but because it seems esoteric and you want to spiritualize it, you think that you're like tapping into something really amazing. It's like, from a spiritual lens, and I don't mean to be flippant about things that I may not agree with, but if that sounds cool to you, like, yeah, that's what apostolic succession is.
Yeah.
And by the way, the church where that comes from is the longest running governmental institution, even if you just want to think about it in political or secular terms, in human history. It's been going on longer than the longest and most successful Chinese dynasty in those eras of bygone times that we fantasize about.
We outlived Ming. We outlived Rome. We outlived Greece. We outlived the Ottomans. We outlived the Turks. We're going to outlive America. Sorry, hate to say it, but we're going to. We outlived England. I mean, it's not going anywhere. You mentioned an interesting point about like things that attract people, right? These Reiki symbols. Oh, there's everything, right? And we can get into 1,000 things. I love country music. That's all I listen to. I'm a big country music guy. And there's this song called Church in a Chevy.
Okay.
And I love the premise of it because you can turn on the radio and you hear God's name said on public radio. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. We're doing things again. Like, look at us go. Go us. But the concept is like, well, I don't need to go to church. I go drive my truck into a cornfield and that's where I talk to God. And kids are like, yeah, that's attractive to me. And that's, I'm like, that's scary. That scares me that you don't think you have to go join other worshipers and go to a building to be in the presence. God's present everywhere. Like, I'm not going to debunk that theology. But if you truly want to give him what he deserves and truly, to the maximum, participate in your faith, you need to get your butt to Mass on Sundays, people. It's not that difficult. I'm asking for, 58 hours a year you are obligated to be at Mass. 58 hours a year. Some people work that much in a week, and we're asking that over a course of a year. It's not a huge demand.
Well, the way that you're going to attract people that aren't already sold on that is you have to give them the why of why it's fundamental, why it's important, why it's effective, right? So, I mean...
But before we can do that, we need to fix our liturgies and do better internally because we're lacking in that standpoint. We need to fix ourselves before we go back out. And I have that's my big issue with the Synod. That's my big issue with the Eucharistic Revival. That's my big issue with the spirit of Vatican II, is we're not looking inwards. We keep just blaming society and looking outwards. How can we bring people in? Let's look at trends and TikToks. Like, how many priests have TikTok accounts, right? Because that's where the kids are. So we have to go there. No, you fool. Look internally. We screwed up. We fell off the wagon. Let's fix ourselves first. If I walk in the Mass and I don't feel like I walked out of normal reality and entered truly where heaven meets earth into a truly special occasion, you failed. You failed me. In 90% of parishes in this country, I would probably classify as you failed me.
Well, I don't throw around stats liberally, but it would be interesting to get the stats on how many of these churches were built, post 1960s versus the ones that survived from antiquity. Because architecture is extremely important.
Architecture is super important.
Teaching people pedagogically.
I've seen churches though that were 150 years old, and instead of just like, okay, I get they needed to build a second altar because the high altar isn't in use, right, for Novus Ordo Mass. I get that because you've been to St. Anthony's in Buffalo. I think it looks beautiful. They have the Novus Ordo altar and they have the high altar. These churches are still choosing to...
We got rid of one of them.
Oh.
On one of these days.
Yeah. But they're choosing to, like, so you see where there's still an altar. It's still up on the altar, right? The altar that's used for Novus Ordo Mass at St. Anthony's is still up on the altar. These people are taking that altar and putting it on the floor, so you're just looking at a vacant sanctuary space. And it's like, how hard is... Why did you wake up this morning and decide this was a good idea? Like, where were you educated? Who approved this? Like, just give me... And no one has an answer to the why. I would love to get to the bottom of why. Who thought this was a great idea? Because if you're trying to replicate the Last Supper, you need to go... You failed basic theology, apparently. Like, you must have been just chosen because of other redeeming qualities you have, because theology is not one of them.
Well, I mean, that's assuming that there's ignorance involved. There's also the concern of malice. Right. Mm-hmm. There's either ignorance of the intellect or malice of the will. And, there are entities that you can study in terms of the way that they want to remake architecture in their image and likeness. So that there's so much to seek and to find. I would just say that based on everything that we're talking about right now, there's a lot of work to be done in order to continue to bring hope to people. I vibe with what you're saying about, as the synod is going on, and honestly, for me personally, I've hardly even been in tune with it, so I'm not up on it. I've been kind of taking the like medieval peasant route where, I might know the Pope's name, I just know I'm supposed to pray for him and focus on virtue. But one thing that I think we all also need to tackle, and that's my thing, like anything that I can actually make an impact in my own community. Like one PSA that I've brought up on this show before and we'll bring up again is, you can't just watch Mass on YouTube and fulfill your Sunday obligation anymore, right? Like, to your point, like, get to church and don't, bash the Catholics because the church is super beautiful looking and you think, oh, that money should have been spent elsewhere. Like, remember the fact that started grassroots and people actually wanted to contribute to something in order to make that happen. Like, everyday people made that happen. And don't bash people that are actually trying to do something like what we're doing right now. It is so easy to criticize and it's so hard to actually put skin in the game, to have a courageous conversation like you and I are having, and to throw every judgment under the sun. Well, maybe I am a clericalist, and why are these laity talking? And it's like, well, because the clergy have their hands tied and they asked us to.
Yeah.
And, why are you, this and that and whatever. And it's like, there ought to be a lot more patience. There ought to be a lot more kindness. It ought to be at least an attempt to seek understanding before we cast aspersions. And I think that's what's going to attract people, right? Like more beauty, more, just more attempts to connect with authenticity.
I shared that sentiment that you mentioned in the later stages of elementary school, early middle school. I couldn't understand why, like, the communion cups, the chalices, the patens, the spoons are gold. And I'm like, wow, that's worth so much money. And, like, we could probably, like, help a lot of people. And then, like, I don't think anyone told me. I think I just read stuff and it dawned on me of, like God deserves that. He deserves the best minerals that he gave. Like, he gave us all those natural elements, right? Gold is all from the earth, his creation. He deserves to be given back, like, the best that we have. We should show up to church on time, appropriately dressed, within hopefully a conscience that's clean because you went to confession.
And by the way, stay until Mass is over. Don't do the Judas shuffle.
Stay until Mass is over.
He left early too.
All these little things, like, don't show up hungover. All these little things you can do on Sundays. And, like, yeah, put on your best suit. And, maybe if you have you're lucky to come into some money, like, ask Father if he needs one of the ciboriums replaced. They're not cheap. But recognizing how important it is to have that, like, the best of the best materials, I think is just so important to the overall experience of the liturgy. I think, the Mass was, and I don't go long too on tangents, we've been going for a while, but... Yeah,
we'll wrap it up here in a minute.
The Mass...
So feel free to give the final word.
Like, the Mass was designed so it was a free evangelization tool because it utilized symbols and movements that were natural constructs in society, right? If you're kneeling, it's understood that you're in a state of adoration. If you're standing, you're in a state of solidarity, and so on and so forth, right? Sitting is your receiving stance. And the Mass was set up with all these sit, stand, kneels, crisscross applesauce, do the hokey pokey stuff. But it spoke at a time when in culture and society, those were understood to mean something. That's how you didn't have to open your mouth about evangelizing in the church in the 15th century. If someone walked in and saw everyone on their knees staring at this little white thing and a big, beautiful gold decked out jewel thing, yeah, that's important. I'm going to partake in that. I'm going to ask some questions and see what's going on. And we can reclaim that, use the best, monstrances, and don't use these chalices that are like pottery and stuff. I mean, it even says it in the germ, it should be gold plated, yet you get these priests who are like, oh, well, this was made by the sisters and I was ordained, so I'll use it. And it's like, yeah, but it looks like something my kid made in art class. Like, I wouldn't use that for God.
Well, and you know what I also would not have my children participate in at all, ever?
Pottery class?
The hokey pokey.
Well, yeah.
You want to know why?
No.
You want to know its origin? It has its origin in Protestants blaspheming Catholics.
Really?
Hoc enim corpus is what the priest is saying at the words of consecration. And Protestants were basically like, oh, that hocus pocus, that hokey pokey.
And turn yourself around. So yeah, trying to convert.
It was meant to blaspheme God, who will not be mocked. And you know, it's funny enough. I don't even know if you did this on purpose, but knowing your history and knowing, you know, the culture, knowing how we got where we are, is certainly a very powerful way of being part of the solution to get us to where we ought to be and we ought not to be.
Be the top 5 coldest moments in the Diocese of Buffalo, banning the twist.
Wait, what?
Yeah, back in like the 70s or 60s when the twist dance became popular, there was Bishop Burke put out an official pastoral letter banning the twist. I don't know if it still withholds to this day, but just that was a thing.
I better find out, because I don't want to inadvertently do it if it's out of obedience.
But how cool is that? Like, that's awesome. Like, top 5 coldest moments for sure.
Well, St. Alphonsus Liguori, the moral doctor of the church, has touched on certain forms of music that are objectively displeasing to God. I mean, the church certainly has the right to weigh in as such, and you know, it's a holistic thing.
Can we get rid of guitars in mass? Can we start that movement? You and I, buddy.
There was a joke.
You and I, buddy. Let's get going. It's a lot of work to be done.
I love referencing the Second Vatican Council document on music that says organ has pride of place. Stick with the organ.
Gregorian chant should hold a prominent place in worship.
Absolutely, it should be chant and a little bit of polyphony.
Yep. Healthy. I'm fine with, you know, like if you're gonna. It's the balancing act, right? We talked about the balancing act. I'm deferring to the wisdom of Holy Mother Church. Yeah.
You know, I don't think we ought to impose things above and beyond necessarily. As a theologian, you know, you have a unique right, you know, according to Donum Veritatis, to question current standing disciplines. But even then, you ought to do it with a tremendous amount of circumspection first and deference ultimately. You know, so
that's where the pastoral element comes in. That's where the balance has got to be, and that's where I guess my mission ultimately stands.
Right. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on.
It's
really awesome to hash it out and to just be real, man. I want to echo once more that there's a fire inside of you that's palpable, and I think it's so needed. You know, we need authentic discernment in the church in order to navigate the way forward. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
I'm stoked to hear about what you got going on moving forward with We Are the Easter People podcast on Spotify and elsewhere. And your upcoming book, Let's Get Back to the Basics, right?
Reclaiming the Basics.
Reclaiming the Basics.
A Catholic guide to saving the church.
If it's God's will, out next Easter, circa. And we'll definitely keep in touch and hear more about the trajectory as that's coming out. And anything else going on? I mean, we'll certainly be praying for you and your apostolate and your ministry work. Keep doing great work, you know, at the local level, because that's where it all starts, right?
Yeah. Stay true to the roots. Stay true at the local level, and don't be afraid to make a difference. Like, if you see the need, like, there's nothing wrong with at least having the conversation, right? There's things you can do on your own that you don't need permission to do, and, you know, take advantage of that opportunity.
Amen, brother. So with that, I would like to invite you to please subscribe to this content. You know, I like to say, if you got value, I know you got value out of this conversation. You know, we do ask just to help us to spread more wholesome Catholic content, help people to find their voice, help people to find their inner courage, and maybe most importantly, help priests to know that we love them, we support them. We are the sheep, right? We are trying to figure this thing out with the utmost authenticity and sincerity, and that ought to be worth something. So if you would like to be a part of the solution, we invite you to support us here on The Rich Dawn, and you can go to KyleDeanGorlick.com to find out all the latest things that I have going on. And we just want to say thank you. Go ahead and make a difference in your community, and God bless you.